Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, magical ones, and welcome to the show. And oh my goodness, what a portal of transformation we've been in since recording our last episode. I've been busy birthing a beautiful crucible called Invoke Your Wild Apothecary, which is for those deeply sensitive women who shame their magic and feel a deep call to energetic medicinal healing so they can discover their deep desires and medicinal gifts. Running it in November, just in time for Samhain or Halloween, where the veil becomes thin between the two worlds, we will be journeying with and dosing 6 medicinal energetic remedies and exploring healing alchemy to invoke your power and magic and help you become your fullest expression of who you came here to be. To feel into whether this journey is for you, and you might get a sense of it in today's show too, head to nicolebarton.co.uk/wild-apothecary and read more so you can choose to join us. For now though, let's dive in as with the perfect guest. On The Secret Witch Show today, our guest is Ian Watson. Ian is a writer, educator and trainer who has worked in the field of energy medicine, natural healing and personal transformation since 1988. He was the founder of a homeopathic training school in 1993 and is the author of 4 popular homeopathic textbooks. After a long exploration into various forms of psychological and emotional healing, Ian was introduced to the 3 principles understanding in 2011, and this has been the foundation of his work ever since, as he now trains practitioners in the innate wellbeing paradigm. In this episode, which was so full of gems, I couldn't capture them all in my takeaways, Ian and I explore what we mean by energetic medicine and illuminate how phosphoric secret witches often have a deep call within them towards magical energetic work, which is often lying as a dormant susceptibility and usually expressed as shamed sensitivity. We discuss magic versus science and how to harness energetic medicine for our own magical healing, and the importance of healing energetically ourselves before learning to become our medicine for others. Let's dive in. Welcome, Ian. I am delighted to have you on the show, not least because you're a dear friend. And I remember, I don't know if you know this actually, I remember when I first met you at Viva a few years ago, I was kind of starstruck at first. I was like, oh my God, it's Ian Watson. He wrote all of my homeopathic textbooks. And then I think I met you and then insulted you. And then we went for dinner and it feels like we've been friends ever since. So yeah, I don't know if you know that, but I deeply appreciate you and your wisdom, and I'm so glad you're here. Funnily enough as well, somebody in my group asked if I'd ever been mentored by you, and I went to say yes, and then I realized I hadn't. So yeah, it feels somehow that I have been mentored by your wisdom. But yeah, so welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you.
Thank you, Nicole. It's my pleasure to be here. And I don't remember you insulting me, I have to say.
I think I said something about your hat.
All right, okay.
But I'm glad I didn't insult you, that you remember. So that's all good. Yeah. So welcome. Yeah. And again, I don't normally do this bit of the intro, but before we begin, it feels we were just chatting beforehand. It feels important to highlight that what we might go into in this episode is possibly some kind of overlap between kind of what you share around homeopathy and the kind of foundations underlying the work that I guide women into now with my work with the remedies of the wild, which you and I have had conversations about, because I know you're a homeopath, you teach people homeopathy as part of what your gift is. And yeah, that's essentially the energetic medicine that's underlying this path. So it feels significant to kind of distinguish that from the outset, that some of what we talk about in this episode, and really, we're talking about energetic medicine at the end of the day more broadly, but some of what we talk about may overlap with this work, may be slightly nuanced. And we've also both walked the three principles path as well. So I think we'll come to that too. But firstly, I would like to open by inviting you to share a little bit more about your own journey with energetic medicine. It feels like a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah. It started early for me, and not because I grew up in a family that had, that encouraged natural healing or anything like that. It was my own interest just got sparked at an early age in my teens. Initially, I felt a strong connection just with the natural world, and I spent most of my childhood really just out in the woods, out in nature, and felt very at home and comfortable in that environment. And then I started to become aware that a lot of those things that just grow naturally in the hedgerows and in the woods are actually medicines. And that was a kind of, I don't know, something in me got very intrigued by that possibility, that these are not just pretty things, when you see these berries and flowers. I mean, they are that, but but there's also, each of them has specific powers, if you like, which have been discovered or uncovered through centuries. I mean, literally thousands of years of people engaging with the landscape and somehow getting to know what can do what. And I just found that whole thing fascinating. And then I picked up a book which was like an A to Z of alternative healing when I was about 15, and I just read it cover to cover. It was like the best book I'd ever found. And I can't tell you where that interest came from. It felt like something that was already dormant, inside me, and it just got woke up. And of all the different therapies that struck me, it was particularly homeopathy and also the flower essences, which caught my attention. And that led me just more and more in that direction. I just started to read more and follow my own interest. And I started to buy some of the remedies. I discovered you could actually buy them prepared in a particular way. And then eventually I went on to train as a homeopath, and that became my vocation for a good number of years. I ended up, as you say, writing some books and running a homeopathy training school. And really, for me, homeopathy is like the epitome of energy medicine in the West. I would see it as kind of having really, in my mind, it has equal status to, let's say, acupuncture or, ancient Chinese medicine would have in the Orient. It maybe is not so widely accepted as yet. I think these things take time, and I tend to think of it in a big span of time. Some homeopaths get impatient. Why is everybody not using homeopathy yet? I said, well, it's only been around a couple of hundred years.
I'm one of those.
Yeah. As a system of healing, I mean, the idea has been there a lot longer, but as a system of healing, it's still a new kid on the block, really. It's relatively new. But to me, it's one of the most fascinating and deep and rich subjects, which, although my work has gone in different directions over the years, it continues to be like the foundation of how I think about health and disease and processes of healing. I realized that in the last few years with what we've been going through in the world, with the whole COVID situation and so on. I was very grateful for that early education that I had in learning to think about health in a more energetic way and a holistic way. I found that it's really served me well.
I love that. There's so much in there. And I love firstly, just to speak to how you said you kind of didn't grow up with this. It was something that kind of felt like it was lying dormant. And I think that really speaks to a lot of the ways that my women may feel about kind of, yeah, the kind of tug to this journey, or the tug to soul, or the tug to working with the remedies of the wild, or homeopathy, or energetic medicine more broadly, I guess, is that they don't necessarily grow up that way. Or maybe they do, maybe they, like you, kind of immersed in the remedies of the wild, but it's something that just is kind of there, that they might not notice for a long time, but it was kind of tugging at them silently.
I think that's a good point, and it is something that's easily overlooked, and yet it kind of niggles at us if we ignore it. And I feel that there are certain junctures in our life, certain critical moments, where the potential that's in us can get activated, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. At a particular point, for whatever reason, we're too busy, or something else is preoccupying us, but it doesn't go away. That's what I've learned. It doesn't go away. If it's there as a potentiality, it just kind of waits in the wings, and we cycle back around to it at some point in our life. And a lot of people, when I was running homeopathy school, it was very striking to me that a lot of people come to something like homeopathy and alternative healing later in their life. They've done lots of other things, but they've always had this kind of a yearning, or this kind of a pull. And now they feel like they've got the space to explore it. So I think you're right. There's something like that is within all of us.
I love that. And there's a kind of like inevitability about it as well. It's like it's inevitable that we will end, if we feel that call, it's inevitable at some point we'll follow it. But my women, particularly as secret witches, often are pretty good at putting distractions in their way. So I always talk about that. It's like we're really good at creating distractions away from magic and energetic medicine.
Me too. I think that's part of the deal, isn't it? It's part of the human condition. And maybe that's how it has to be, because what that requires of us then is that we have to make a commitment at some point. We have to overcome that inertia, that resistance, and that tendency to be distracted by other things. And I think there's something in us has to sign up for it fully.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And that's often one of the hardest things to do at the same time, unless you're kind of like me in my own initiation to the remedies of the wild, or homeopathy and energetic medicine more broadly. Was when I became ill. It was like, again, we can kind of get to that point where, and this is why I say it's kind of inevitable, like eventually if we ignore it for long enough, there'll be this kind of almighty wake up, for me, that was how it was. I got ill with chronic fatigue, and that was my initiation. It was like my body literally stopped me from doing anything but looking in that direction.
That's the commonest route in, from what I've heard. Most of my peers who were training in homeopathy alongside me was a similar story to your own. That it was through a health challenge of some kind that hadn't responded to anything else, and then eventually, in desperation, it's like, oh, I'll take a look at this, and lo and behold, it helped them in a way that nothing else had, and that catches your attention, doesn't it? When you've been up against it for a long time. It's
It
like, whoa.
definitely does. Yeah, I'm just as you're speaking there, I'm just seeing some kind of synchronicities with maybe the reason for that. It's almost because, again, I talk about this a lot, as magical ones who are typically the ones working with energetic medicine, they're often deeply sensitive, and maybe we'll talk a bit to the phosphoric personality that I often talk to, because that's typically who my women are as witches. But it strikes me that actually maybe it's exactly how it's meant to be, because we're deeply sensitive as magical ones, and therefore kind of exhausted by the mundane world. And it's like our initiation into magic has to be that way.
Exactly. It's, in some sense, it's thrust upon you. There's nowhere else you can go at a certain point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless we choose it, of course, ourselves
Well,
before we get
yeah.
there.
I mean, for myself, I think of myself as having gotten lucky, because I'm pretty sure that would have been my journey too. I would have probably had to just get sick in order to stop me doing whatever else I've been distracting myself with. But I consider myself fortunate, not because I stumbled upon it at an early age, because I think a lot of people stumble upon it. But what was fortunate was that I recognized that that was what I should be doing. That's what I should be following at a young age.
Yeah.
And I gave myself,
Yeah.
I gave myself permission to go with it, if you like.
Yeah, I love that. It is, yeah, that speaks to me so deeply about kind of giving ourselves permission, because I think that's something that my women often struggle with. And I think that's kind of tied into this kind of, we talk about my women in the context of them being witches, because again, that's kind of my sense is that witches are those that are kind of harnessing that energetic medicine. And I'm just wondering if there's something that you can see about that in terms of what might stop the witch from kind of embracing that energetic medicine.
Well, I think in one form or another, it comes down to some kind of fear, doesn't it? Usually, we're afraid of what the implications will be if we do follow it. And sometimes we've had experiences that that suggest to us that this is a dangerous path, or that it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And so understandably we can shy away. I mean, even just to this day, people often think of homeopathy as not necessarily in the same category as being a witch, but they often think of it as something that it's unscientific, it's not rational. There's no scientific evidence for it. This is what a lot of people will just come out with this stuff without ever having really studied it for themselves. There's a tendency for it, for it to be dismissed, and therefore you can easily feel dismissed by association, and and unless I think there's a certain point where you get really solid in your own understanding, and then those things no longer bother you. You're no longer concerned by people's opinions. But until that point, it matters to us what people think, and we're social creatures after all. So I think that's part of the journey, isn't it? That we have to get sufficiently well, thoroughly grounded in our depth of understanding and through our own experience. Usually, it's through the trials that we have to go through. I think we get to that point where we can't be thrown off by the threat of other people's disapproval, or of what we think we might stand to lose by following this path, in terms of social status or career prospects. So I mean, there's a lot of things potentially we can lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really speaks to the heart of my women. I know for me, a lot of the work that I do with women is helping them arrive at a place of really loving that kind of sensitivity and magic in themselves. And I think that's kind of critical to what you're saying there. It's like we need to love ourselves through that fear to be able to choose it fully and allow ourselves to be, yeah, to be
No, very much
in
so.
that.
I think there's also the additional dimension. If it becomes your work, if healing, for example, becomes your vocation, there's also the additional aspect of how can I give so much to others on a daily basis without detriment to my own well-being. And that's not an easy thing to navigate either. As I said, particularly for someone who's naturally empathetic and sensitive, it's in your nature to give and to serve. But how to do that without cost to your own health is, for each of us, we each have to find our own way through that. And it's not necessarily easy.
That's yeah. And again, I often talk about like almost for me, the route that I guide women through is we have to kind of become our own healer first and foremost in order to then be our medicine in the world. And I think that's what you're really speaking to there. It's like we really need to take this medicine for ourselves before we go on to dose other women with it.
That's it. And it's not just a one-off. Take them.
Mm.
It's an ongoing.
Yeah, it's not linear. I'd love to explore as well the bit that you said about science, but maybe first of all, because we haven't actually dived into what we mean by energetic medicine. I'm wondering if we can go there first. Just to kind of it's not an easy question, really, is it? But let's start with that, and then we can dive into.
It's a good question, and it's a valid question because I consider homeopathy, which has been the medicine of choice for myself, I consider that to be an energetic medicine. And it, in fact, it only makes sense if you consider it as an energetic medicine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? Which is interesting in itself. In the same way that acupuncture only makes sense if you consider it as an energetic medicine. It doesn't make sense if you look at it purely materialistically. So what do we mean by that? I think you have to start from a different assumption than the kind of materialistic reductionist mindset that has been predominant in the West in the last few hundred years. If we start from an assumption that includes the findings of science in more recent times, like the quantum physics, for example, then there's no conflict there with what science is saying. But what do I mean by that is we have to start from the recognition that everything ultimately is one energy, that all of nature, everything that we can perceive and everything that even is beyond what we can perceive, all arises from the one source and is infused by that same one energy, that one single consciousness. And that nothing is apart from that. Nothing can be separated out and ever be different or separate from the whole. When we start from that perspective, then energy medicine, if you like, is the art and science of understanding the interplay between the different forms that energy can take. That's how I tend to think about it. So we live in an embodied form, right? It looks like this body is kind of solid and persistent. That's the appearance, but actually it's somewhat illusory in appearance, because what's actually happening is that the cells are being renewed and replenished every second of our life. So it's constantly in motion. And if we look into it closely enough, we discover that even those cells and the molecules of which they're made and the atoms of which they are made, when we go into the subatomic realm, what do we find? Pure energy. We don't find particles. They still talk about them as particles, but they're not actually particles as physical objects. There are no discrete objects in the subatomic realm. What there are is vortices of energy moving at high velocity, which creates the illusion of solidity.
Oh, I love that. That's gonna have to be one of our quotes from this episode. That was like
It's a darn good illusion, to quote Einstein.
I love that. And there's so many places I could go with that one. But what strikes me immediately is that what often, because you and I both have walked the path of the three principles. In fact, that's how we met. And I know you lead a 3P practitioner training as well. And this is a huge part of what you teach. And what I'm all about also is guiding women into their bodies. So I just want to speak a little bit to the importance of the body when we're saying it's kind of also this illusion. I wondered if you can just talk a little bit more to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Nicole, because to me, to make energy medicine work effectively or at all, we have to, so first of all, we have to think holistically. We have to see that each individual is not separate from the whole. We're all fundamentally made of the same energetic stuff. But then in order for it to actually apply it to the individual, we have to see what is the unique expression of that energy. What's the unique expression that it's taking in this particular embodied form? So we have to pay very close attention to the individual, what we in homeopathy we call it the signs and symptoms of the characteristic signs and symptoms that are unique to this individual. And it's really interesting because what we're doing is we're building up a picture of what makes this person uniquely the person that they are, the individual that they are. And what is it about the unique way in which they interact with the whole? That's what creates what we call the remedy picture, which is why we're interested in things like, well, what kind of weather do you like or dislike? And what temperature do you prefer? And what foods and what things in the environment affect you, positively, negatively? What we're actually looking at is how does this unique individual interact with the whole, such that there's something about that set of interactions that is unique to them.
Yeah, I love that so much. And the way I talk about that often is the kind of co-creation between soul, aka body, and spirit as well. But I just love how you've brought that together, and it reminds me of Rumi's quote about the ocean. you're not the, I can never get this the right way around now. You're not the ocean in a, no, which way is it? You know the one I mean.
The ocean in a drop, or the drop in the ocean, is something like
Yes, that's the one. That's the
that.
one. Yeah. Yeah, it just reminds me of that quote because it's like the drop is that unique expression essentially of the ocean. To me, that's kind of the most basic way that I could explain that, I guess. But you spoke to that so beautifully, and I think it's that kind of unique expression that we're here in life to kind of make the most of. It's like this is our one, well, maybe not our one chance, actually. We may come back in other forms, but in this life, why not make it the most juicy expression?
Exactly. And it's the only one that we have available to us right now.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
who knows what, happens beyond that. But I think that, to me, that does speak to the inclusion of the physical bodily aspect has been, it's a necessary component of this experience that we're having. And a system of healing that somehow dismisses that or denigrates it or says, well, it's all just spiritual or it's all just thought. Well, no, it ain't.
Yeah, I
it's
love that.
it's been
Mm,
expressed through this embodied form in a very particular way. And I've come to have a real respect for the uniqueness of that, because I think that that's it's not, to me, it's not random. It's never random, and it's not coincidental. Um, it's meaningful and purposeful if we choose to see it that way.
oh, yeah, I love that so much. I've got goosebumps at this conversation. It's amazing. I could talk to you for hours. There's something in there, I think, that we talked to just before we started recording, which was interesting because I know, again, in the three principles world, I actually asked you what your experience this was, because often there can be, that I've seen, some resistance to the word healing in the three principles world, particularly where people kind of almost misinterpret that because it's thought, because there's kind of like the energy of thought, it's like, oh, it's just a thought, it doesn't matter, which can kind of result in this bypassing of the body essentially, and bypassing of our being human, in that misunderstanding. And I asked you about this before we started recording. You were like, well, actually, I don't come across that very much, which is really interesting in and of itself. So I wondered if you could just speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, that was interesting, wasn't it? Because, and it, to me, that illustrates the point that's very important in energy healing, which has to do with what we call susceptibility. That we all have unique susceptibilities, and susceptibility means that we're more or less influenced by certain things, and in turn we are influencing other things and other people. So it's like a two-way thing. It's not just a one-way. And susceptibility is exerting itself in every area of our life, including, for example, the kind of Facebook groups we hang out in. which will color the kind of experience that we have around the work that we're doing. So one practitioner might say, oh, I get all these people with a lot of resistance to this, and another person will say, oh, I don't seem to get any of that. That's a susceptibility issue through my lens, through the way that I think about it.
Yeah, I
It's,
love that.
again, it's not random that one person would have that kind of an experience and someone else just doesn't seem to have that experience, even if they were hanging out in the same group. They just wouldn't notice that somehow.
Yeah, I love that so much. I really do love that, because again, most of my women who do some often come from three principles, come from this, again, this susceptibility of like, well, we don't need healing. So again, there's that deep resonance. They will come to me because that's kind of, they're seeing a like cures like, I guess, essentially. So there's a resonance with that. So I'm wondering if, given you've kind of gone there, whether we could talk a little bit too, because my women tend to be, as I mentioned, phosphoric, and I've started to talk a little bit more about this recently. The remedy personality of phosphorus. I was just wondering if you would be able to talk to that particular personality, if you like, that remedy, to bring it alive a bit for my women, because it might reveal something that's different to what I've already shared about her and her kind of personality. I just thought it'd be quite fun.
Yeah. So when I learned the remedy, I remember it as the remedy that everybody wanted to be.
Yes.
But I mean, relative to the other remedies that we were learning, there were some that when you heard the remedy picture, you definitely didn't want to be that one, Whereas phosphorus sounded like a lot more fun to most people.
Yeah.
Why? Because the textbook description is of someone who's naturally open and vivacious and curious about life. And, it's kind of a high energy sort of picture. And they're portrayed as the life and soul of the party. And, sometimes described as like the light bringer, the one who lifts the energy and has that kind of, enlightening aspects to them, all of which is true, of course. But what you don't discover until a little bit later is that comes with a cost. And that actually, when your energy is very diffusive in that sense, which it is in the phosphorus picture, that constitutional type has a natural capacity to kind of feel their way into situations and other people. You can pick up on atmospheres. You can get a felt sense of what's going on very, very quickly. That's a gift on the one hand, but it can quickly feel like a curse if you don't learn how to harness it in a way that's healthy. And, the downsides of it often result in a being burnt out, or an over-giving or an over-empathetic relationship to other people, feeling taken advantage of in lots of respects, or sometimes just being oversensitive and wishing you could shut the damn thing off for a while.
Yeah.
There's actually a sensory overload experience that can be part of that picture where you wish you were just a bit more normal. It's like, why am I picking up? Why can't I just how come other people can't even smell this thing that is, it's torturing me?
I so relate to that one. Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, go on.
It's almost like that particular constitution is like, that's a big part of the challenge is you got to learn to live with the fact that your bandwidth is wider than most people's. So you're picking up on frequencies which are outside of the range of what most people would notice or be bothered by. And somehow you've got to be able to accommodate that. You can't just shut it down and make it go away, because when it's part of your nature, that's what you were born into. And the phosphorus, as I understand it, is one of the basic, what we call constitutional remedies, which means you can recognize it early on, as even a young baby or a young child. There are certain ones that are the phosphorus types, and they are just naturally open and sensitive, and will pick up on all kinds of things. Not everybody's like that, of course. So it's very interesting if you have that particular constitutional nature, and you're around people who are unlike yourself, they can feel very harsh. The environment can feel very harsh and very unforgiving to you, and it can feel like you want to be somewhat in a bubble, you need a protective bubble around you. And sometimes that's actually what's needed, energetically. You have to learn how to work with and contain, I think, that energy, but not shut it down, so that it becomes a gift you can harness, rather than something that you're constantly struggling with, as it feels like the environment's just too much for me.
I love that so much, because especially my women who, again, the typical secret witch will be that deeply sensitive, like beautiful, it's a beautiful sensitivity in the phosphoric witch. And mostly when they're kind of immersed in the mundane world, they'll shame it and shut it down, like you say. And I think that's the gift of kind of working with energetic medicine this way, is coming to see that actually there is a deep gift in that sensitivity. And if we can harness it to kind of in alignment with ourselves and that kind of unique expression that we're here to be, that's magical. That creates magic. So I love how you
there's another aspect to it as well, which I came to recognize as important, which is because a phosphorus type would be very open to new things. So there's loads of phosphoric constitutions in something like homeopathy, because they're just more open to it than most people. They don't question it or have to get their head around it. They just feel the rightness of it and go for it, But there's a downside to this, or there can be, which is that there's a danger that the person can be easily influenced. right? That openness means that other people's ideas can get planted in you relatively easily as well. And so that is also, I think, an important part of the learning journey and the growing is recognizing what's truly yours and what isn't. And it's really, you know, that's an ongoing thing because I think it's very easy when you have that natural openness and sensitivity. It's very easy to absorb and take on other people's ideas of what you should be doing, how you should be living, and you know, whereas other people, they're much more self-contained, so they don't have that susceptibility to the same degree.
That's really interesting. And it's something that I've spotted actually, the pattern both in myself and my women is that they struggle to trust their own soul and what their soul's called them to as well. So I think that really ties into they've almost like been so easily influenced that they've created those experiences where they've kind of almost again kind of felt like they've been taken advantage of, which makes it then harder for them to be able to trust that this is actually in deep alignment for them to kind of embrace and work with that phosphoric personality so that they can become their full expression as well.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times where that loss of trust is a feature because of the painful experience of, as you say, taking something on or being naturally trustworthy and then having that trust be abused in some way, and then coming to a conclusion that, oh, actually, it would be safer not to go there in the first place, you know?
Yeah, bless them. Yeah, I really feel that in my heart as we're talking about that. There's that feels quite significant for my women. And again, that lack of trust will have them in that closure to them being their medicine, essentially, their phosphoric medicine. One of the other things that you just spoke to was the kind of constitution that we're born as. And I know I'm going to ask you this because it was a question that we had a glorious conversation about recently that I asked you. I was like, why is it that we come here as a particular energetic constitution? I know we had a great discussion about this, so I just wanted to include that here because it feels like there was some gold in that.
Yeah, I've forgotten the detail, but I remember we did have that conversation a few months ago, wasn't it? And one of the things that occurred to me when you were asking it was around the fact that to me the constitution that we're born with, which includes our physical body type, you know, not all bodies are the same. And the phosphoric body type is different to the what we call the sulfur body type or the lycopodium body type. So these recognizable templates, if you like, for a human constitution, they each differ. And what each of them to me contains are both the susceptibilities and the potentialities that individual needs for their own, let's call it their own soul journey in this lifetime.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think that was the kind of conclusion that we came to is that essentially the way I see it is phosphoric women. I mean, not everybody, as you say, is a phosphoric constitution. And yet phosphoric constitutions are magical ones, which again, kind of, so not everybody is a magical one. And that's why it's important, I think, because it's important to see if you've come here as a phosphoric woman or man, but the work that I do is mainly with women. If you've come here as that phosphoric constitution, the conclusion that makes sense to me is that we've essentially, our soul has come here as that to live out a particular set of remedy relationships or susceptibilities, as you would call it. And essentially so that we can live through, for me, it feels like we come here to live through some wounds in order to find the gold, heal ourselves, and then become medicine for other women as well. Is the way that I see it. Yeah. So that just felt really, really significant when I saw that so clearly.
Yeah. I think of it in terms of evolution. You know, that evolution is happening throughout the entire order of everything. You know, the whole universe is evolving in some sense, and we too play our individual part in that. And in that sense, our own individual evolution is part of a bigger picture as well. But there's something about the fact that we have to recognize and honor again the uniqueness of what is it that we're being challenged with that's unique to us. So I see that growth, to me, growth happens as a kind of challenge response process. If there's no challenge, there's no growth, essentially. I think of it like, the oyster shell, we use in homeopathy to make the remedy calc carb. The oyster shell can grow a pearl inside, but only if there's some grit, some sand has to get caught, which is like an irritant. And the fact that it's an irritant means that the oyster grows something around it, which turns into this beautiful pearl. So I think we all need the grit. We need the. Ram Dass used to call it the sandpaper of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it the darkness and like the material for liberation.
Yeah, exactly.
All this stuff that we go through, and we have this. It's like, again, I see it. We kind of called it in to experience it so that we could liberate ourselves of that pattern.
And once we can see it from that perspective, then we're really, I think, then we're on the path fully, more consciously. If we don't see it from that, until that point where we consider it that way, it tends to just feel like, why was I born with this? Why is this happening to me? Why couldn't I have had that person's body instead of this one? Because they look like to be having a much easier time than I am. It looks like bad fortune or bad luck until we kind of wake up to that possibility that actually, no, what if it was perfectly designed?
Yeah, I love that so much. Yeah. And also just really normalizing that we've all been at that part of that journey. And that's so needed in order for us to expand into our unique expression, into our wholeness, I guess you could call it, if keep going on what we talked about earlier. That's so beautiful. You said something there around I can't remember what it was now, but something that kind of spoke to me around the idea of ancestral healing. I think you talked about how, what was it you said? You said something that sparked me into thinking about ancestral healing and miasms and epigenetics. Almost like, again, that evolution, I think it was, that you were talking to. And for me, it feels like really important as part of the work with kind of the witch archetype, if you like, that there is a kind of ancestral healing element to it. Because if we think about our ancestors who would have been like deeply sensitive phosphoric personalities as well, they were the ones being burned at the stake for being that gift, for being their medicine. And I think for me, epigenetics particularly and miasms explain how that kind of trauma, if you like, can still be present for us in our kind of experience today, if that makes sense. So I'm just wondering what your sense of that is.
Yeah, and when we use that term miasm in homeopathy to describe, on one level, it's used to describe patterns of disease which are seen to be to run through families, for example, to be multi-generational. So we can see that someone like me who might have a tendency for colds to go to my chest, I have ancestors who had TB. It's not that I would necessarily get TB as a disease, but I have the susceptibility in the lungs, which connects to that ancestral disease, which, was a big deal for many, not just my ancestors, but for many people going back generations. So that's one level of it, is how it helps us to understand how disease tendencies can run through family generations. But again, I think of it also in evolutionary terms or in growth terms. And I tend to think of those miasms more as challenges for the growth of humanity that we collectively have to meet and overcome. And so in homeopathy, we have like these major, what we call them chronic miasms. And one of them, the psoric miasm, for example, I see that as related to the challenge of physical survival on the planet Earth. That's not an easy thing. Even though we've become relatively civilized, so we like to think, and we've got a lot of home comforts and all of that. Well, yeah, but what happens when the lights go out? Or what happens when, my experience, when I went to India, I traveled to India with a backpack and not much money. doesn't take long for you to feel like you're in survival mode. And suddenly you're starting to remember what it's like to live as a more kind of early human life experience, where can I eat this thing? Is it going to poison me? Can I drink this? Is it safe to drink this? And suddenly you're really up against it in a very visceral way. So that would be like a very early challenge that humanity faced, but we still face it to varying degrees. It wouldn't take long for us to be worried about our survival again, if the lights go out for a prolonged period, for example. But then we've got other challenges that have to do with things like the challenge of sexuality. How do we conduct ourselves in regard to sexual relationships? That's got a whole set of challenges around it, which again we still grapple with. And then human relationships beyond the purely sexual, the relationship between self and other, and then the relationship between self and the whole and society. These are challenges for all of us that we're constantly having to negotiate. And so to me, the miasms as energetic forms, they contain the seeds of these challenges. That's how I think about them. And if we meet the challenge well, we can, in some sense, we can stay healthy in relationship to that miasmatic pattern. If we don't meet it well, or we refuse to meet it at all,
which is always the temptation,
then what tends to happen is that tends to activate some of them, what I would call the pathological aspects of that same miasmatic influence. So then we start to suffer with the ailments and the illnesses and the symptoms and the diseases that in homeopathy we associate with that particular energetic pattern. So I tend to see it as something that we can navigate and negotiate. It's not inevitable that those things just make us sick. And it's interesting because in the world of genetics, they tend to think of genes now more in those terms, don't they? You might have inherited the gene. It doesn't mean you will get the disease. Those genes have to be switched on. And that requires certain things within you to go in a certain direction, and also within your environment. The conditions have to be conducive. And if the conditions are not conducive, then that gene will never be problematic for you. And it doesn't matter that your ancestors died from disease X, Y, and Z. It's just there as a dormant tendency, if you like. So there are a lot of overlaps with the way that we talk about it and what modern science has started to see. It's not a fixed thing. It's fluid and dynamic. And that again points back to the energetic nature of it. I think calling it genetics makes it sound solid. People are often worried, I've got the gene, therefore, it's somehow it's immovable. I think that's a mistake in understanding. I don't think these things are ever fixed and solid.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think they're starting to see that epigenetics can kind of be reversed and healed, which is always interesting to me. There was something else that we talked there about science. I'm just thinking if there's another question around science. I think there's something often, again, magical ones can have this, like you say, this deep call to magic, but also this deep fear of magic, given that science doesn't explain it in a linear, logical way. And I just wondered whether you could talk to that a little bit, because one of the things that I always think is really interesting is essentially that science created the rules for how it measures everything. So homeopathy kind of has its own philosophy, which never really fits into the way that science measures, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I think one of the flaws in the scientific method, and I'm not against science because, you and I, we've both probably flown in aeroplanes and taken out, we're using computers right now. These are the products of science. And there's a lot of things that science has gifted us, which we can be grateful for. So I just want to say that. But
yeah, I'm really glad you presenced that. Yeah.
But I think, the medical paradigm, which has kind of come out of the materialistic scientific paradigm, is somewhat limited and limiting. And so that's been more of interest to me, is to kind of push the boundaries of that a little bit and to see where we're not unnecessarily boxing ourselves in and limiting our options, because we're thinking about healing and medicine and the body in a very mechanistic, materialistic way. So just as an example, one of the flaws in the scientific method is the idea of reproducibility. that something is real if it can be reproduced. If you can do it in this lab, and then someone else in Zurich can do it in their lab, and someone in Australia can do the same thing and get the same result, therefore it's real. What that says is what an individual experiences in a particular moment is not real, right? By implication, it dismisses the uniqueness of the individual experience. And that to me is one of the downsides and the weaknesses of science is the readiness to dismiss what the individual knows to be true.
The unique
And
expression.
yeah, exactly. And this is a lot of people's stumbling block when they meet modern medicine, is that they know their own experience and they go to the doctor and they run the tests and they say, we can't find anything. There's nothing wrong with you. And what the person hears is, you're making it up.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what's being implied. We can't measure it and we can't reproduce it here, therefore it doesn't exist. And yet the person knows what they know through their own experience. So again, it goes back to that. What are we going to trust? What are we going to put our faith in as the ultimate authority? Is that authority external to us or is it internal to us? And I think that's one of the big challenges of our current growth cycle.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I was just, as you were speaking, was just coming to mind. It's like almost that kind of, when we meet that point of resistance, it's almost like that invitation into seeing that we don't need to outsource our healing, that it's something that we can actually do ourselves. Like we can actually work with this energetic medicine to heal ourselves. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me around that. That feels really powerful.
And that doesn't mean that you can't hire the service of someone who can help you. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean we have to do everything by yourself on your own, but your relationship to that practitioner or whoever you is completely different. The authority is coming from within you. It hasn't been, as you say, outsourced to another.
Yeah, and it generally does take having a guide, in my own experience, having a guide even into learning to heal ourselves. But it is coming from that place of like you're learning to harness your own power rather than outsource it. So yeah, really, really glad you present that as well. There's also something around science that the way because we talked about this episode being called how to harness the magic of energetic medicine. I think there's something around the kind of magic and science exploration just to illuminate, because for me it feels like magic is essentially everything that's not yet been able to be explained by science as well. So there's this, just because they can't yet explain it doesn't mean that it can't ever be explained.
Yes, and the chances are that there are things that will ever remain mysterious.
Yes. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
Simply
absolutely.
because our faculties are limited. In the embodied form in which we're experiencing life as humans, we can only experience this vastness of all that is, the oneness of consciousness in a very, very condensed down, limited form. So that says to me that the idea that we can, at some point, science will get to a point where we will and can know everything about everything. That to me is a nonsensical idea. We start
Yeah,
in the wrong
I
place.
agree. What comes to mind that's just making me chuckle as we speak about this is like we don't really fully understand gravity yet, but that's not like outcast, like, well, gravity's a load of nonsense.
Yeah, you're right. And electricity, same.
Yeah.
No one has really been able to say where it actually comes from. What is the actual? We've learned how to harness it. And we talk about generation, electricity, we say we have generators. We don't really generate it. We create the conditions within which it becomes manifest.
Ooh,
But
I love that.
we're not doing the generating. It's misleading. We give ourselves the credit for these things, but and like with gravity, we've learned enough about it to understand how not to kill ourselves falling from heights, or, too regularly, or how to keep an airplane up in the air, for as long as is necessary. But there still is, you get below that level, and there's a whole bunch of things about it that we fundamentally don't understand.
Yeah.
It's truly mysterious.
Gorgeous. That's gorgeous. There's one of the things I do love about kind of science and homeopathy is the water experiments by Emoto. And there was one I recently came across. I don't know if you've seen her work, by Veda Austin.
Yes, yes, beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is magical. I shared that in my group actually the other day. I've been following her because yeah, that feels magical to see how, yeah, energetically the water looks different. Yeah, when exposed to different things.
Yeah, and this is maybe it's one of the ways that homeopathy can start to make a bit more sense, is when we understand and appreciate. And really, it's funny because this is, as I understand it, this is a principle of magic, which is that things that have once been in contact with each other can continue to act on each other and to influence each other. I think I'm right in saying that that's one of the kind of founding ideas of magic, the law of contact, I think they used to call it, which, you know, it connects to the thing of like voodoo dolls and sympathetic magic and all of that. But, you know, in homeopathy, we're taking an original substance, and it then goes through a process that we call potentization, which means it gets diluted, but it also gets energized. And so the process renders it completely safe. You know, if it's a poison that we start off with, pretty soon it's completely harmless. It takes away all of the toxicity. And yet something of the imprint, the unique imprint of that substance, gets carried through all the way through. So that even if you end up with something that's got no molecules, no measurable quantity of the original substance, it still has something of the energy of the substance, which a person who needs that energy will respond to it instantly. And which, that to me is all the proof that I need that must be so. When I see a person take a remedy and boom, you know, I've literally seen it, something has started to be, the healing has begun within minutes before my eyes, and they felt it, felt the impact of it. And yet there's nothing material in that. Well, what is it? It's an imprint. It's an energetic imprint that's been carried somehow through the vehicle of the remedy. So that, to me, it's both magical and scientific. You know, there is a science behind it. There is a certain way that we have to prepare the remedies, otherwise it just doesn't work. You got to follow the way that we've discovered is actually workable. But there is still that kind of magical, mystical element to that, isn't there? It's just
There is, yeah. Yeah, and I just remember being astounded at several times because I'm, again, phosphoric women are so sensitive. I tend to have huge responses and reactions to remedies, and I've always been dosed quite highly with remedies as well. So I remember countless times where I've taken a remedy and then it's instantly just I've exploded with some kind of reaction, which again isn't typical for everyone. But I think it's part of the reason why, when particularly working with phosphoric women, and I've talked to you about this as well before, the way that I've been working with it with my women in my group crucibles isn't necessarily dosing the remedies themselves by giving out actual remedies. The way that I've been working them and seeing increasingly is like really powerful, is kind of dosing them energetically, kind of bringing them to life in a live circle, so that women can really almost like you know, kind of archetypal personalities, these remedy relationships that the phosphoric women tend to kind of experience that they need healing with, kind of bring them to life as personalities which kind of help women resonate with their shadows and with their gold. It really helps activate my women, and I've seen can have almost the same triggering response even without taking the remedy.
oh, for sure. I've seen the same thing. And to me, it makes sense. If we think of healing as a movement in the direction of wholeness, or restoration of wholeness, which is what the root of the word heal points back to, then anything that we do consciously that uncovers our relationship of the part to the whole. And I think that's what happens when you start to explore a remedy picture. You start to see things about yourself that were invisible before. And it brings things to light. It brings things into consciousness. And so there is a kind of restoration to wholeness that you start to join the dots, you know, and it happens quite quickly and effortlessly. It's not even something you have to think to make happen. You can just, you can hear someone describing the remedy and you go, oh, something happens within you. As you say, it's like an activation. And that to me is healing in and of itself.
It's that deep resonance with kind of whatever is, we talk about homeopathy as like curing like. When you resonate with something and it kind of activates whatever is within wanting healing, is the way I see it. So yeah, it's really, really interesting just to presence that, I think, because that's quite a unique way of working with the remedies, I suspect. But it's not that you actually need to specifically take the remedy if you're working in a way that's kind of, it's being energetically dosed. So yeah. Is there anything else around that? I think also just to speak to healing responses, because now I've probably terrified everybody. I think just to come back to that, it's kind of what we talked about earlier, in that kind of like a healing response is that kind of activation that's kind of needed for us to be able to move through and liberate whatever it is that's kind of stuck, or where we're kind of feeling stuck with something.
Yes. And there are ways that it can be conducted that are more or less gentle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely seeing that, particularly around potency. Like there's again, when I'm energetically dosing, so I'm now kind of taking potency of that into account. So yeah, really starting to read like what potency is needed here, especially with phosphoric women as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important aspect that we learn. And Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, his ideal of healing was that it should be rapid, gentle, and permanent.
Yes. Yeah. I love
But
that.
he emphasized the gentle, particularly in the latter part of his life. All of his work was dedicated to reducing any, peripheral suffering or side effects, or what we call it aggravation in homeopathy, where the symptoms might get intensified. He was constantly striving to eliminate that aspect because he didn't see it as necessary to the healing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we mistakenly think that suffering is a necessity, that somehow we have to suffer, it has to be an ordeal. And where I grew up in the north of England, if the medicine didn't taste horrible, it wouldn't do you any good. It's the same idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for me, like when we're working with these remedies, it's important that we work with them in a really honoring way and with as much love for ourselves as well as possible.
Exactly. And if you feel that, if someone prescribes, I say this to anybody, and I don't care who their practitioner is, if someone gives you something to take, when you take it, by your own response whether that's good medicine for you at that moment in time. And if it's not, I recommend you stop taking it. Don't overrule your own instincts because someone else says this is good for you.
Absolutely.
That's the beginning of trouble for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, gorgeous. Yeah, again, it comes back to that kind of learning to be in our own power.
Yeah, and also it is an ongoing learning about your own system. How sensitive are you? You don't know until you start interacting with certain things, and then you find out. I had to learn that the hard way because it turns out I need way less of any kind of medicine than the average person, including acupuncture. I've been and had acupuncture treatment. They'd start putting the needle and then they'd realize, oh, you actually only need one. You don't need six.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it comes back to that deep sensitivity of the phosphoric women as well. Yeah, there's something else that I was going to. Oh, yeah, it just occurred to me as well that often at the same time as saying that, there can also be this tendency for my women, especially, to kind of avoid the deep work with the remedies because they're kind of again, when we've got to that burnt out stage of like, oh, this is just, yeah, we just kind of rejected the mundane world and kind of just gone into like doing nothing and just licking our wounds and kind of hiding. There can be the tendency as well to also avoid going into the healing. So I think it's just important to presence that. Again, it's not like we're saying, yeah, if you're taking the medicine and it's bringing something up that is that material for liberation that really wants that healing, it's not that we then ignore and bypass that. It's that kind of paradox, isn't it, of holding the two.
Yeah, very much so. And you're right, and it's a good point, well made. And it's often the case that if we suppress or deny something for a long period, then when we finally surrender and allow the healing journey that's necessary to be activated, there probably will be some initial suffering, just because of the fact that we've been sitting on it for so long.
Yeah, yeah,
or
absolutely.
trying to push it away for so long. When we finally let go, often there is that kind of the body mind has to somehow establish a homeostasis by throwing that off initially and getting the energy moving again. But we just have to learn not to be afraid of that, you know, and to see that that's just a temporary. It's a bit like wait, you know, I can remember times when I've been a bit ill and I just couldn't throw it off. And then I've taken a remedy or been given what I needed, and then I had a raging fever. And you can say, well, from one perspective, it looks like I'm worse now, but actually,
Yeah.
I knew that
I
was.
know it's so, yeah, it's so paradoxical, isn't it? I just thinking, like, I call it like a beautiful healing response, but I guess I didn't always see it that way.
Exactly.
So,
We've got to have enough understanding to be able to know that we can trust this. This is just the body mind doing what it needs to do. We can trust it. And yes, it feels a bit intense, but that's going to pass quite quickly.
yeah. Yeah, I remember actually speaking to when my face was paralyzed. I remember taking a remedy and it got worse. And I literally remember saying to my partner, I was like, oh, this is really good. It's got worse. He was like, what are you on about? I'm like, no, it's a really good sign.
It's
So,
moving, right?
yeah,
Something's shifting. It's been activated. Yeah, but at least you see you had enough trust in that process. So then you can relax around it, you can go with it.
yeah,
Whereas
I was excited. I was like, this is excellent. And it was. So, yeah.
you
But
knew
yeah,
that. Whereas someone without that understanding would look at the same thing and freak out, probably.
yeah, absolutely. So, there were just a couple of questions in the group that I thought we could just come to before we complete, if that's all good with you. One of them was, where do we start with harnessing and continuing to harness the magic of energetic medicine?
Oh, I think this to me the starting point is listening into your own intuitive wisdom, which means that it's going to be a different starting point to everybody for everybody. There's no one size fits all for this, but I think the starting point is listening in to what is it that calls you, what speaks to you, what resonates for you. These are the words we've been using today, and I will just reiterate that because that is what energy healing is all about. It's about paying attention to what has resonance for you. And there are
Yeah.
already things in your life that have resonance for you that you might have been overlooking. And listen in, listen up. They're
Mm.
already trying to speak to you, you know,
How might
whatever.
that show up? I'm just thinking in terms of like practical
Well, it's going to be different.
sensations.
Yeah,
Mm.
for example, I know people who've been having dreams for a huge part of their life and completely ignoring them.
Yeah.
And all they had to do was turn towards the fact that they have a gift for dreaming. And suddenly it became something that they could harness and that would actually contribute to their healing. It was already there, you know, they already had that gift. Whereas for other people, it can be something like you've always wanted to draw or make art or music or grow a garden, and yet you've been too busy. Well, that to me, that instinct, that pull is also in the direction of healing for you. It might seem more indirect, you know, it's not like finding a medicine necessarily, it would seem like a direct route to healing. But if you follow that thing that has been calling you, healing will happen as a result in an indirect way. It will lead you in the direction of healing. So often it involves bringing a creative faculty to life or giving it expression where it hasn't been allowed expression before. That's another form that it can take. For some people, it involves putting yourself in a conducive environment or taking yourself out of one that isn't conducive.
Mm,
Is a good start.
mm.
Well, what do I mean by that? Well, some people are doing a job that they don't like that is soul destroying. They know that it's not really what they're here to do, but they haven't yet found the courage to give it up. Well, at some point you will.
Mm.
And
What I'm
that
hearing is again that kind of deeper listening to what's in our hearts that we kind of, especially as phosphoric women, kind of ignore and shame and avoid.
That's, to me, is what it all points back to. It's an individual path that each of us, only we could discern it for ourselves. No one else can tell you what shape or form it will take. You can get hints and you can get inspired by seeing other people follow their path, but it won't be your path. Yours won't be the same as theirs. So to me, that is the starting point. And I know that sounds like a non-answer in a way, but to me, it's truly the answer that works. It works for everyone who follows it.
Yeah, beautiful. And I was just thinking, actually, just before our call, I was working with that homeopathic tarot that you recommended to me, the one by
oh yeah,
is it Tracy Ferris? I've got it here. And again, that's another great way, again, especially if we're thinking about kind of working with the remedies of the wild, as I call them, that kind of homeopathically, even just kind of being immersed. I remember there was a woman in one of my feminine mystery crucibles, and there was a deep like resonance that she had with sunflowers. And it just became really, really clear that because when I kind of looked into sunflower as a remedy, it just became really clear that was actually the specific remedy that she was here to work with. And I think if you're having like a deep pull to a specific remedy, it's maybe an invitation to kind of, spend some more time honoring that medicine and being with it.
Absolutely. And it might not even look like a remedy from a normal perspective. It might be that you're drawn to a particular tree or something like that. Or even I've had points in my own life where there was a specific piece of music that spoke to me so deeply. And I just kept playing it over and over and over again. That was a remedy at that moment in my life. That's what was needed. You wouldn't call it a medicine, normally speaking, but it actually was. It was healing for me, and it didn't make any sense rationally, and it doesn't usually.
Yeah, I love that.
So you've got to be willing to have it be nonsensical and a little bit non-linear. It generally doesn't fit what the rational mind would take us towards, but it has a feeling of rightness to it.
Yeah, I love that. Especially about homeopathy not being logical. It used to make me chuckle when I'd be taking cases of men who'd come in with like a sore ankle, and I'd be like, "What type of cheese do you like?"
How could that possibly be relevant?
So yeah, completely nonsensical and yet magical. Gorgeous. One more question, if you just got a moment to just speak to this one, was how do we know what energetic to dose ourselves with? And the reason she was asking this was because when I was teaching feminine mystery for about a week, as I was preparing to lead them into Palladia, which is essentially like, for me, represents like the queen archetype, the power. I almost dosed them with Platina, which for me is like a whole supercharged level of power. And essentially, because I was essentially embodying the energetic of Platina, which was the like equivalent of like big power, I had all sorts of material for liberation, because in effect, I had dosed myself with that remedy in preparation to dose my women, which luckily I realized before I dosed them with it. So I did actually dose them with the right remedy. But I think that the question that she's asking, she said, I guess I'm afraid of dosing myself and calling in more than I'm ready for. So my question is, how can we harness it in a way that we're ready for, bearing in mind, of course, that everything is perfect. So yeah, that's a good one.
Well, yeah, that last sentence kind of nails it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you bear in mind that everything is perfect, then you can't get it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
You can appear to sometimes take the wrong thing, or too much or too little or whatever, but with hindsight, you generally see that actually it wasn't really wrong. Sometimes maybe the timing was a little bit off, or it was a bit less gentle than it might have been, but ultimately, no lasting harm can come from energy when we're working energetically with energy medicines. I don't believe that lasting harm can come. The worst that can happen is that you might feel something, that's a bit intense or temporarily distressing, but it's going to pass pretty quickly. So every prescription is an experiment, because this again to me is like where homeopathy contradicts the orthodox idea of science. That in science they say, well, this is the dose, and we give the same dose to everyone, and we can predict what the outcome is going to be. Well, really? Is that really true? I mean, and it's not true even in medical science. They give the same drug or vaccine to thousands of people. Do they all react in the same way? Of course not. Why? Because of the individual susceptibility, which is invisible until you evoke it.
Yes.
So to me, the true response is you can't know how you're going to respond until you take the damn thing, until you interact with it in some way. So therefore, at first, if you're feeling a little bit nervous about that, well, tread gently. Yeah, take what we call in homeopathy a minimal dose. Take the least you can get away with until you start to feel some effect from it, and then see if you can find what is the optimum dose for you at that point in time. And it might be very, very little that you need, rather than going in all guns blazing and right from the beginning. I just recommend, you start gently until you get to know how that particular thing interacts with your system. What you're really learning about is your own system as much as you're learning about the remedy. And that's a learning curve for all of us. It takes time. And I've had to learn, to respect my own system and how I react to things, just as you have. So each person on this journey has to do that for themselves. But ultimately, you can trust that the energetic system that we inhabit is self-regulating and self-correcting. So if you take something that doesn't seem to sit well with you, well, just stop taking it and let your system regulate itself back to equilibrium. It will do that by itself. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I love that so much. And what came to mind as you were speaking there as well is, again, it's like just that having that deep reverence and honoring of the remedies as well. But also what came to mind is what I realized is that people can come to homeopathy and they can take remedies. Often people who are kind of against homeopathy as well will do that, and they'll take the remedy and it'll have no effect. And one of the reasons that I've seen for that is that they're not working consciously and honoringly with the remedy. They're not kind of what I call invoking the magic of it. And that's what I've seen is like, especially why it's not able to be measured like in the ways that science wants it to be measured, is that often when they're measuring it, they're kind of not using it in a way that's with that magical invocation. So I think what that brings me back to is the kind of the conscious use of the remedies as well.
Yeah, I think any treatment, not just what we would call the natural treatments, any treatment will, the effect of it will be enhanced if you work with it in a conscious way. And you listen in to the degree to which it actually resonates for you. You're not just going along with something that's been given to you or told would be good for you. That to me is a really crucial step on anybody's healing journey, where that authority then becomes more internal. Somebody recommends something to you, you try it out, but you listen into how your own system responds. And then you decide from your own authority whether more of that is going to be good for you or not.
Yeah, that conscious choosing of it, essentially.
Yeah, I learned that at such a young age. I was so lucky. I didn't know that that's what I was learning. But the last time I was given antibiotics, it was the last time I saw a doctor. I was 15 years old. So that's 45 years ago this week.
Yeah. Wow. I know. I was thinking the same for myself the other day. Just I haven't taken any mainstream medicines for such a long time.
No, it just hasn't been necessary for me. But what was interesting was at age 15, I was given a prescription, and the deal is you've got to take the whole course for 10 days. And I took them for 2 days and I felt better and I threw the rest away.
Mm.
Now you could say, well, that was just me being a rebellious teenager, but I don't think it was. To me, that was the first time in my life that I realized I can trust my own system more than I trust an external authority.
Yeah, I love that.
And I consider that a significant moment in my life because I've trusted it ever since.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And especially for the witch who really can doubt her own power at times. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This whole conversation has been just magical. I've loved it. So Thank you.
My pleasure, Nicole. It's always fun to explore these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm going to put in the show notes as well, but where can people find out more about you and what projects have you got coming up that people might be interested in?
Oh, they can find me on my website, of course, which is the insightspace.com. The insightspace.com is written as one word. And that's where I post. I mean, there's quite a few resources on there that people can access, audios and videos and things. But also that's where I post events and upcoming things. I have a few emotion days coming up that I like to do, which is small one-day workshops with small groups, usually in people's houses, which are fun. Exploring the three principles understanding, the innate well-being that we all possess. And then I've got a practitioner training starting in a month's time, which is going to be at Regent's University in London. It's going to be a live in-person training for anybody who wants to come out and play. And that's what I really love to do, is to work with groups, not just over Zoom, but actually, live in the room, because I feel like we are energetic beings after all, but we're also in embodied form. And it's just lovely to get together and explore these things as a group. So that's what I'm up
Yeah,
to.
magical. Well, I'm envious of all the magical ones gathering together. Maybe I'll have to come and find you.
It'll be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, gorgeous. All right. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, magical.
Thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. It's great work.
Thank you very much. Oh my goodness, were there so many gems in that episode. I don't think I can actually fit them all into my takeaways, but let's give it a go. Here they are. Magical wands do not always grow up having had magical initiations. It's a conscious choice to initiate ourselves into our magical medicinal powers. It's also likely inevitable that we eventually follow the call to invoking energetic medicine, if we grant ourselves permission to, despite our many distractions. If we don't, largely, soul finds a way to make it happen. Not everyone, though, is here to be a magical one. It's a unique gift, and yet one that most witches deny themselves because of fear. Magical women are often born as phosphoric constitutions, which is the personality everyone longs to be born as for their magical, open, bubbly, light, effervescent energy. But often in the mundane world and through fear, Phosphorus burns out from seeking approval and shaming her deep sensitivity, and not knowing how to harness her open, magical energy, which can leave her not trusting. The remedies of the wild and their homeopathic lineage are forms of energetic medicine, and yet these paths can often be doubted by those looking for logical, linear ways to heal, which are often taught is the right way by the modern world. Science, whilst wonderful, often looks at the homeopathic lens in a reductionist way, which doesn't support the way it works to return to people to their unique expression of whole-souledness. Essentially, science created its own way of measuring everything, and homeopathy doesn't necessarily fit into that way, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just mysterious and yet unknown because it's magic. We are all susceptible to specific remedy relationship patterns, and within those, we can heal our wounds in order to discover our gifts, and this becomes our unique medicine for the world if we choose it that way. The witch wound as a homeopathic miasm makes sense from the perspective of epigenetics, and it doesn't mean we can't heal from it and expand past being stuck with it. The deep invitation is to learn to heal ourselves and reclaim our power to heal, rather than giving that power away innocently to others. Although energetic medicine is aimed to be rapid, gentle, and permanent, and is on the whole, we can sometimes experience healing responses, also called material for liberation or activation or triggers, when working with energetic medicine. But these are not to be feared, as they are good signs that healing is working. Anything can be a healing remedy, even a piece of music, and it's about listening into our hearts as to what is medicine for us. It's the resonance that matters, because like cures like, so any resonance will be healing. We can also dose the remedies of the world energetically, working in an honouring and sacred way with each remedy as an archetypal personality, and we do this very consciously.
If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.